In the world of Demon Slayer, we've met a ton of powerful characters, but some of the most powerful characters are the ones who are known as the Upper Moons, and they are arguably, as a collective, the most dangerous group in the series, which is why in today's newest Anime Explained video, we're going to be breaking down every character who has ever held the title of Upper Moon by covering everything you need to know from their powers to their origins and other various facts. Depending on where you are in your Demon Slayer anime journey, this video will contain spoilers, but as always, I will keep any spoilers limited to what is only needed to know about each point that is made. As for the order, we'll be working our way up in reverse order, so we'll be starting with number 6 and we'll work our way all the way up into Upper Moon number 1. Starting off at Upper Moon number 6, we're going to be going with the newest Upper Moon 6 of the series, Kaigaku. He is one of the few Upper Moons who in their past life was once a demon slayer before getting turned into a demon, and his blood demon art is electrokinesis, a great building upon his mastery of thunder breathing during his time as a demon slayer. As you can guess from that last bit of info, when he was alive, he was a user of the thunder breathing style and a former senior disciple with Zenitsu back in the day when they trained under the former Thunder Hashira himself. However, while Zenitsu was undergoing the Hashira training and he was on his way to quickly surpassing Kaigaku, the latter was out on a mission where he had the grave misfortune of running into Upper Moon number 1, Kokushibo, and it was during their encounter that destiny happened. In the face of such an overwhelming power, a true apex predator, Kaigaku, instead of trying to fight back, gave up the fight and became a demon by ingesting the blood that was offered to him. This moment, it is a stark contrast to what we've seen with characters like Rengoku and Giyu, who both outright refused to take up the offer to become demons. Kaigaku, despite his arrogant and super confident outward appearance, was just as much of a coward as Zenitsu came across early on in the series, but the difference between these two is Kaigaku is able to hide his cowardice better. During his early years before he became a demon slayer, he made his way through life by surviving that harsh period, by surviving by any means necessary, that was including and not just limited to stealing the things he needed to get by. He wasn't above sacrificing the kids that Gyokko was watching because it meant his own survival, in spite the fact that he was one of the orphans that Gyokko was looking after. On the most basic of levels, he is the embodiment of the dark truth for most humans. When choosing between others and your own well-being, there are a larger number of people than we care to admit who will choose their own self-preservation over the well-being of another, which is why we as a society, we're able to praise those of us who are willing to put others before the needs of themselves. It's the first sign that he will become a demon slayer, a profession that will require doing just that. He was a natural with the sword, being the former Thunder Hashira his best student yet. Despite all of this, Kaigaku and all his talent in the profession that he would go into was still only really looking out for himself, never able to move past that super fatal character flaw that hindered his development. When he battles Zenitsu, the contrast, it becomes very clear when you read the fight closely. A true coward who acquired power, looking down upon someone who, while he did have his own fears, and is the comedic scaredy cat that you expect, the fear of Zenitsu, it is different than the fear of Kaigaku. Zenitsu's fear was a contrast because that fear, it never stopped him from doing the right things, training to go stronger, and that fear was a reminder of the importance of acknowledging the risk that he was undertaking. Knowing that one is on the edge of death, it gives a situational awareness and it forces you to tap into the proper usage of survival, making use of your training when it's needed the most. Their battle was a display of conflicting values of right versus wrong when it comes to self-preservation, and thus making Zenitsu's defeat of him that much more rewarding because of what it did for both of their character arcs. Zenitsu will be rewarded for his bravery in spite of his fear, and Kaigaku would disintegrate before being beheaded as punishment for giving in to his fears and the blood on his hands. As a true testament to his thunder breathing, it made him a deadly Upper Moon, capable with the sword and moving with high agility and quick slashes and super quick bursts of speed. His biggest drawback when it comes to thunder breathing is the fact that he never learned the first form of thunder breathing, in spite the fact that he mastered all the other 5 forms of thunder breathing. His blood demon art, electrokinesis, allows him to make black lightning that can attack his enemies, and when he fights Zenitsu, he nearly killed him with his blood demon art after almost destroying his eyes and leaving him severely injured. When he combines it with his thunder breathing, it makes it even harder to keep up with him. Next, we have Upper Moon number 6, Daki, whose blood demon art was sash manipulation, which allowed her to make a flower pattern sash from her body that she could manipulate them at will. She's a rather unique case in that she shared the title of Upper Moon number 6 with her brother, and it's arguable that had it not been for her brother inside of her at all times, with Muzan noting had Gyutaro not been weighed down by Daki, he could have defeated Tengen Uzui with ease, and it's implied that Gyutaro's own strength was that much higher than some of the Upper Moons ahead of him. It can be argued that had it not been for Gyutaro, she never would have been Upper Moon 6. Back during her human years, she lived in the lower class entertainment district of the Rashomon riverbank with her brother. When we meet her in the anime, she's nothing short of a sadist. She's taking pleasure in the cruelty placed upon others and their pain before she kills them. Due to her status as an Upper Moon 6, she looked at any demon slayer who wasn't a Hashira as being beneath her, which for the most part isn't wrong to take that stance because of the age that she was when she got turned into a demon by Doma, who was Upper Moon 6 at the time. Daki is every bit as petty as one would expect a bratty child to be. That's why we see her so quick to have these violent impulses when she doesn't get her way, the way that a child would throw a tantrum. And as time goes on, her thirst for violence only grows up, evident by the moments when she is shown pulling on the ear of a small child in the anime because she's annoyed in that very moment. She's vain in how she preferred to only eat people that she viewed as being beautiful or powerful because anyone else she viewed them as being beneath her and not worth her time, which is why she viewed those as being weak or ugly. She killed them and she just left their bodies out in the way where people thought, hey, they unalived themselves. In so many ways, one could look at her behavior and call her a sociopathic sadist, a hypocrite to a degree because she would often shame her victims before she killed them, making them believe the misfortune that was about to befall them wasn't her fault, but instead it was their own. She was gaslighting. She was a beautiful, curvy woman in a lot of people's eyes, and she knew all of that, and she knew she was the one making money at the whorehouse that she lived in, and she was quick to remind those who owned it that while they might have other girls there, she was the one who brought in the top dollars, and without her, the rest of those girls, they were nothing. After having lived for as long as she did and living a better life as a demon than she did when she was alive, where she was a child who grew up in poverty and was left on death's doorstep, it's easy to see why she prefers her life as a demon to her life as a human. Yet it's because of the trauma of her human life that one of her weaknesses as a demon was introduced. As we see, when Nezuko is using her flames on her, Daki was in both physical pain as well as emotional pain because the flames were a reminder of what happened to her in her human life where she was burned alive. She was a tortured soul who grew up during that time, being shaped into the woman that she was as a demon by the experiences that life gave her. But where the beauty in the character comes from is the fact that beneath that cruel exterior, her brother still saw her as someone worthy of going to heaven, and the story sends a good message to readers when it shows us the two of them, they're in limbo together, where her brother's trying to convince her that she needs to go to heaven. She instead chooses to walk into the fires of hell with her brother. If you want to dig deeper than it just being a reflection of her brother and sister relationship, it can also be said that this is a reflection of both their symbiotic relationship where Gyutaro was inside of her and the two cannot live without the other. And it can also be said that this was a moment meant to show you that in the end, even if you feel remorse, you still have to pay for your actions, even if there are those who see the good inside of you for your heart. You could argue that the reason Gyutaro saw her as worthy of going to heaven is because when they were alive as humans, she could be easily influenced and manipulated, and when she was a demon, despite the fact that Muzan didn't care for her, she was still being gaslit and manipulated by Muzan, yet she didn't make any excuses and she walked into hell with her brother. When she uses her blood demon art, we see her power with it is enough to hold off multiple opponents at once, including two of Tengen Uzui's wives and the duo of Inosuke and Zenitsu, and was even able to do very well against Tanjiro when they mixed it up. It wasn't until she battled Tengen, where he openly questioned if she was even truly an Upper Moon, that it became clear that as far as she was in terms of her strength, there was still an even greater level that could be associated with a true Upper Moon's power, even someone who's supposed to be the weakest one. Yet despite his words, we do see that when she's at her full power, she's able to, with the help of her brother, mind you, do some rather heavy lifting in that battle with Tengen, Tanjiro, Nezuko, Zenitsu, and Inosuke, turning the tables on them more than once in that fight. It's also through, as of now, unknown means that she's able to fly through the air. She is able to carry out high-speed regeneration, as shown when she instantly regenerated her leg and reattached her head despite having it cut off. She's able to freely manipulate her own hair as she needs to, making it a weapon to be used. The reason why cutting her head off won't work is because when her brother was deep inside of her, there was a shared connection between the two, which required their head to be cut off at the exact same time, which means killing her is no easy task at all. The speed of her attacks, it is impressive, enough so to the point where she called Tanjiro's fighting style absolutely boring, and we see her make her sashes from all over her body, which can extend at will and retract at will as well. The sashes are smooth as the silkiest of silk, but as sharp as the very Nichiren blades that the Demon Slayers use. The manner in which she uses those sashes varies from offensive to defensive depending on how she views the need based on the situation she finds herself in. Her sashes can also store things inside of them, primarily the humans she wanted to eat later on. Sticking with Upper Moon number 6, we have Gyutaro, who despite holding the rank of Upper Moon number 6, can be scaled higher than a couple of the demons that are ahead of him, but due to his desire to protect his sister, he stayed at the rank of Upper Moon 6. This ultimately goes back to his rough upbringing as a child, where he worked to provide for himself and his sister, and when they were in the entertainment district, they were barely getting by. This led to him becoming cruel and petty, like the character we meet later on in the series when he's a demon, which makes sense given how deeply into poverty he was as a child and how badly he was treated during his human lifetime, enduring enough suffering that it will break most men or women had they endured it. This led to him believing that it was incumbent upon him to inflict harm and end the lives of those who he believed to have had a better life than him back when he was in his human form. This was part of his dislike for Tengen Uzui, someone who was tall, muscular, and super popular with the ladies due to his charisma and his very attractive looks. As a human, he was forced to grow up very early, being forced to endure hardships and care for his younger sister Daki because of the instability of their mother, and it was because of his strong attachment to his sister and the circumstances that led to him becoming a demon that he found himself still remembering who his sister was and felt that strong attachment to her as well as a strong overprotectiveness towards her. Even after he takes himself out of her body, he's still monitoring her situation out of that strong sense of duty as a productive older brother. After having lived well over 100 years, having fought and killed numerous demon slayers in Hashira, like some of his other peers in the upper moons, he looked down upon demon slayers as being beneath them, and in the battle with Tengen Uzui as it rages on, you can see his gradual growing annoyance as the battle escalates, and Tengen is able to lead the charge against him with the help of his allies that pushes him to his eventual death. Even after he dies, he doesn't regret any of the choices he's made, because they're all things he did to survive as a human. There were choices he made to become a demon. There are choices he made to end hundreds of human lives as a demon, because everything he did it for his sister. Someone who saw the cruelty of humanity as a child. He grew to see power as a way to provide for himself and his sister, even if it meant becoming a demon, because that demon blood was the only way to save himself and her. There's a level of bitterness with this character, which that is to be expected, and yet at the same time, as we see when he wanted his sister to go to heaven, we see the very person who he did this much for is the one person he feels the biggest regret for, realizing that he led her down this path as well, and he finds himself wondering what could have happened if he wasn't in her life to serve as a bad influence, and what if she was born in a better situation. And even when he's in limbo with her, he's still looking out for her best interest by trying to get her to go towards the light of heaven instead of the fiery depths of hell like himself. Realizing he failed her in both of their previous lives as a human and a demon, but now, at least in the afterlife, he was trying to do right by her, yet as we all know, she follows him into hell nevertheless. His combat skills, now they are absolutely insane, well above what you would expect from a Upper Moon number 6, having killed multiple Hashira in the past and eaten hundreds of humans over the span of 100 years. We see him pushing both Tanjiro and Tengen to their limits in their battle, even with both of them having help and assistance, and when he's fighting Tengen in a one-on-one setting, he's reacting to and countering and landing blows on Tengen, despite the fact that the latter is the fastest Hashira, and for a good portion of the fight, he was the one holding the upper hand. Even though he was defeated, had it not been for Nezuko, who used her blood demon art to counter him, he would have killed Tengen, Zenitsu, Tanjiro, and Inosuke, which is why Muzan was so angry when he found out he lost, saying that had it not been for Daki, then the Demon Slayers, they wouldn't have won, because Daki wouldn't have been there to serve as a weighted ball and chain to Gyutaro. He's able to generate lethal poison that coats into his blood slices that would kill humans that hit it. Even someone like Tengen Uzui, a former ninja with a high tolerance of poison, found found himself being affected by it as the battle's going on, and even Inosuke, someone who also has an absurdly high resistance to poison, wasn't above feeling those effects either. For most people, these are lethal attacks. His blood demon art is manipulation, which allows him to use it in various ways, where he can release the blood from his veins, make weapons, and use blood as a projectile fast enough that even Tengen Uzui finds himself moving at careful speeds to survive the onslaught during the battle, which showcased at times that Gyutaro was able to easily match the combat speed of the mighty Tengen. On top of the blood slices that have that poison inside of them, he can also manipulate them to fight in any way that he sees fit. Now, moving on to Upper Moon number 5, we have Gyokko, whose blood demon art is porcelain vase spells, which allows him to move between the vases at extremely fast speeds. Best known for his artistic nature, he was a standout in the anime Swordsmith Village art. As one of the Upper Moons, he went out of his way to try and win favor with Muzan, even taking joy in some of the abuse that came from serving underneath Muzan, and even though he despises Hatengu, he still was able to work effectively alongside him because it was a means to an end in order to please his master Muzan. And he's extremely shallow, ironic given his appearance, and he has soft skin when it comes to being on the receiving end of insults, like we see when Muichiro is throwing them at him in their battle. He's got enough clear tendencies that line up with the belief that he is a narcissist who looks down upon those beneath him and expose his shallow nature. Even after getting his head cut off by Muichiro, he still viewed himself as being superior to the young Hashira prodigy. The petty nature of his character is also on full display when he attacks one of the swordsmiths that he sees making a sword with such intense focus. Despite all of his efforts to throw him off of his game, they all ultimately fail and he stayed locked in, and it drove him crazy. The jealousy stemmed from the fact that a mere human possessed such intensity and focus that not even he as a demon could sway this dedicated man off of his craft, and it riled him up to the fact that a inferior species was the one pulling something like this off. As Upper Moon 5, his power, it is considerable, being strong enough to have killed Hashira from past generations, and his speed and movement between the faces was fast enough that even Muichiro, for a time, someone who's fast in his own right, needed time to adjust to that fighting style. For a majority of the fight against Muichiro, he was in complete control of the fight, maintaining the upper hand, and had Muichiro not awakened his Demon Slayer mark, he would have lost that battle. His blood demon art revolves around the porcelain vases, where he's able to spam them anywhere in this area, making them of various sizes, and is able to instantaneously teleport in from the vases and move at super long distances as a result. When he's using these vases, he's also able to trap people and objects inside of them, and if whatever object he is after is too big, the pots will compress said object in size until they get sealed away inside of it. This allows him to grotesquely and gruesomely start molding the objects inside of them together for the sake of his art, like we see when he has those numerous swordsmiths that he's trapped. However, there's more to his power than just this. He's also able to spawn numerous fishes to unleash upon his targets, which are extremely difficult to kill for normal humans, but they are easily dispatched by the two Hashira in that arc, Mitsuri Kanroji and Muichiro. Some of these fishes, they can shoot out massive numbers of needles, and others, they leave behind deadly toxins when they're taken out. He can also summon a giant octopus tentacle from his pots to restrain his targets or attack them. He's able to create water from those pots that can shoot out high pressure streams in order to lay waste to his targets. Moving on to Upper Moon number 4, we have Upper Moon 4 Hatengu, the Upper Moon who is one of my personal favorites that uses the blood demon art of emotion manifestation, which makes clones out of his primal emotions. He's a perfect example of looks that can be deceiving if you aren't too careful. When you first look at him, you'd be tempted to say, this guy, he isn't much of anything special, and if you think that, you would be wrong, because he's powerful enough to produce a clone that had enough strength to push a Hashira with a Demon Slayer mark to her limits during the battle, albeit that was a clone that had several other clones combined into it, but you get the point. So Hatengu in his main form is a super coward. He's quick to cry and be agitated and run away in fear whenever violence comes his way. At times, he can even be a bit delusional. When you meet him during the meeting of the Upper Moons, he's easily, upon first glance, the least impressive Upper Moon demon, and had it not been for the title, you might have mistook him for a lower ranked demon. And even in combat, when Muichiro slices him, he's crying like a baby and a sniveling coward, and worst of all, this guy's so delusional that he thinks he's innocent the entire time. He takes no accountability and is quick to demand sympathy from others as a result of his delusion. Yet he's one of the upper moons for a reason. His clones, they are a manifestation of his emotions. Each of them possesses their own unique power, and they each carry the strength relative to an upper moon, which makes them very deadly. 1 versus 1 against him quickly becomes a handicap match where you find yourself outnumbered by such a powerful opponent. His powers are unique, where if you plan to cut his head off, 2 of his clones, they will spawn out, and if you manage to cut their heads off as well, then 2 more clones will spawn, and thus it becomes a nightmare to deal with. In order to kill him, it becomes a dangerous cat and mouse game, as it required Genya and later on Tanjiro, where they had to not only worry about the other clones, but also while Mitsui Kanroji was fighting the Zohaku 10 clone, they had to track down his main body, which was incredibly difficult to do in order to defeat the Hatengu clone, which that in itself speaks volumes to how strong Zohaku 10 is, because it was about to kill Mitsui Kanroji and would have done so had Tanjiro not have killed the main body of Hatengu. As part of his powers, he can shrink himself down in size at will, which allowed him to hide during that battle from the demon slayers as they battle his Zohaku 10 clone. Despite his small size, the guy's still super fast when he shrinks down. Just in general with the speed, he's fast enough to match the speed of Muichiro when he uses mist breathing, and Tanjiro when he's using the Hino Kamikaze fighting style. And while he shrank down, he was still keeping a considerable distance away from Tanjiro for a majority of the chase, which also due to his small size makes him a master of stealth. He uses emotion manifestation, which he can use to make clones out of his emotions that have a core emotion that is identified by the marking on each clone's tongue. Each clone has its own unique power in appearance and weapons. Each of them contains a baseline power that is comparable to that of an upper moon, but based on what we see, some of the clones, they are stronger than others, so it's a sliding scale of power depending on which clone that you see. His demon art is activated when you cut his head off, and thus it spawns the first 2 clones, and after you cut their heads off, then you get 2 more clones, and this is where it's a nightmare to fight. You can't kill these clones until you kill him by cutting off his head, which is near impossible given that you are fighting multiple clones that have the strength of an upper moon while simultaneously trying to find someone who can shrink themselves down. It's almost a no-win situation. This brings us to the next version of upper moon number 4, Nakime, who gets promoted right before the Infinity Castle battle takes place. The new upper moon might be on the quiet side, but she's more than capable enough as a fighter, and she's extremely loyal to Muzan on top of that, regardless of the fact she is in a very one-sided relationship and Muzan doesn't really care for her. Every time we see her before the Infinity Castle arc, she's a very hard read and almost comes across as she's disinterested and very rarely ever speaks when attending those meetings of the upper moons and the lower moons. However, she is extremely powerful in that her hacks is very hard to deal with, even for 2 post-Hashira training arc demon slayers in the form of Iguro and Mitsui Kanroji. In her human life, she was a struggling musician with a husband who was a gambling addict who was quick to spend away all of her earnings. This eventually led to her having enough and killing her husband, and so when she went out to the crowd to perform, due to the condition of her clothing, the crowd, they initially turned on her, but then after her nerves calmed and she started playing her biwa, she shined brightly. This led to her having a ritual of killing people before she would perform in front of large crowds, and she got away with it for a long time until one day she chose to kill the wrong person, Muzan himself, who decided he'd spare her life, and he made her into a demon who would ultimately serve him. Now, she doesn't have too much in terms of feats in the way of combat movements that leave your jaw just dropping in response, but she does have the ability to change the structure of the Infinity Castle, which is enough to make the 2 Hashira lovers, Iguro and Kanroji, have a difficult time fighting against her. She can also produce multiple eye familiars from that body that can detach to spy on her targets from afar, and she can switch between the eyeballs that she's looking at by playing her biwa. She can also make portals that transport people anywhere within the Infinity Castle or even throw them out of the castle itself. It can be used for defensive purposes like we see when she battles Kanroji in the final arc. Up next, we have upper moon number 3, the most hands down complex of the upper moons, though that might be a hot take, but we'll get into that in a moment, and I guarantee I'll convince you to see things my way. So being someone who has a thirst for battle doesn't just start as his time as a demon, but it goes all the way back to his time as a human, where he was a skilled martial artist who sought power in his human life due to the circumstances that were pushing him to the moment where he snaps as a human. These circumstances being his sick father and his fiance. When he was a human, early on he was a pickpocket named Hakuji who stole wallets, and each time he get caught he'd be beaten as a result, and eventually he got tattoos placed on his body that made him stand out more inside of a crowd, so it'd be harder for him to steal from people. However, here's the thing, he was stealing money in order to pay for the expensive medicine that his sick father needed. Later on, he would find himself someone new in his life in the form of his fiance, who would be bedridden with her illness. Two people he loved dearly were very weak because of this. Their love story is one that has to be told in order to fully grasp the complexity of Akaza's character. The heir to the dojo next door was violent and mistreated her despite claiming to be in love with her, and he didn't take into consideration her illness, forcing her outside and causing her to have a violent asthma attack, and he left her as a result, which led to Akaza finding her and saving her from what was going to be certain death. This led to Akaza having a run-in with the dojo heir next door, and after he took his fiance to the fireworks show, and after the dojo heir was poisoning the water well of Akaza's fiance and her father, this pushed him to absolute madness where he would slaughter everyone in that rival dojo next door, which caught the attention of Muzan, who promptly made Akaza into a demon. His words to Rengoku and Giyu about the frailty of human life when he offered to turn them into demons, and even his belief in Darwinism, basically that the strongest survives, it all goes back to what happened when he was a human. He lost his father due to an illness. He almost lost his fiance to an illness. He killed everyone next door because they were all weaker than him. Akaza doubled down on the belief that might makes right, and had a high disdain for anyone who intentionally or unintentionally reminded him of what his human life used to be like. His desire to grow stronger was so broken that even after battling Tanjiro and Giyu in that fight, the guy still refused to go down after his head was cut off and was still seeking out the smoke regardless of the condition he found himself in. His rule of never eating women, despite the power that it could give him, it can all be traced back to what happened with his fiance if you think about it. When he is finally defeated, we do see some reflection on his part in that he realized he never respected the wishes of his father to live an honest and an honorable life, and that this entire time, by using the fighting style of his teacher, he was really disrespecting him by using it to kill people instead of protect them. He comes to the realization that the anger he possessed and the thirst for power, it all stems from him being unable to protect and save those who he cared about back during his human life, and he was just taking out his anger on others when the person he really wanted to die the most was himself. It's when the battle with Tanjiro and Giyu ends that Akaza is able to move past his anger at those who might remind him of what he used to be, smiling before he finally falls in battle. In terms of power, it goes without saying this guy's pretty cracked. He's just a guy who just throws hands, and he does so at a rate where he's able to easily pressure someone like Rengoku in a fight and do so without ever truly using his full power, and is later on shown fighting Tanjiro and Giyu simultaneously despite both of them being Mark Hashira, and he still dominated a majority of that fight. He's an absolute beast. As we see when he battles, he has a unique ability to see the fighting spirit of people, and as Giyu says, this ability allowed him to predict the movements and adapt in battle, and his senses are so jacked that even without a head, he is able to locate and find his enemies. His blood demon art, Destructive Death, allows him to make shockwaves that are combined with the martial arts fighting style of his teacher. Those shockwaves can form energy shockwaves in a circular manner. It can make cannon spikes, and it can make invisible air pressure, which the latter gave Rengoku a hell of a time. This makes him an effective long-range combatant. Up next, we have Upper Moon number 2, and the demon who it's safe to say Shinobu and Inosuke hate the most, Doma. He's the leader of the Eternal Paradise Faith, a cult that worships Doma and where they go to receive advice and worship him, but eventually this became a feeding ground for Doma, who consumed Inosuke's mother when she found out the truth that he was eating people who served him. He's a perfect example that someone who smiles all the time, they aren't nice. He's really a sociopath who believes that eating his followers will end their pain and their suffering. He's cold and calculated and highly intelligent. It's why he views humans as being so far beneath him as a species, even more so than the other demons tend to do. Even when the trio of Shinobu and Inosuke and Kano are all fighting him and eventually bring him down at the expense of Shinobu's life, Doma still has in his mind that he is superior to humans in any way possible, and he's pissed off that mere humans killed him. Whereas Akaza won't eat young women, Doma has a preference to eat young women, which is why for most of his cult members they were all women, and the only time he made an exception for one was when he met Inosuke's mother, who he didn't want to eat originally. He wanted to keep her at his side before he would eventually be forced to kill her. The reason he likes to eat young women is due to the fact that they are so fertile. They provide more nutritional value and thus can provide a bigger boost in power than eating someone who's older or someone from an opposite gender. Essentially, young women are to him what shrimp are to me. You put it on a plate and it'll be gone before I can finish the conversation with you. He's strong enough that Akaza, despite his immense hatred for him, has absolutely no chance against him in battle, with Doma gaining power at so much of a fast rate that he surpasses Akaza, despite the latter being a demon for such a long period of time, in comparison to Doma, who's a relatively new demon compared to Akaza. Doma has a few powers, like the ability to absorb humans just by touching them, as we see when he absorbed Shinobu into his body with only a matter of seconds and killing her during that time, which ultimately worked out to be his downfall, given Shinobu's body contains poison. His speed is faster than Akaza, who was relative to a demon slayer marked Giyu, and faster than Gyutaro, who was able to match the speed of the fastest Hashira Tengen Uzui. His blood demon art is cryokinesis, which lets him generate frost and ice from his blood that can be spawned anywhere, and he's able to freely manipulate this ice as he chooses. The ice itself can be lethal to whoever breathes it in due to it killing off the cells in the lungs, with Shinobu thinking that her lungs are about to explode. He's able to make enough ice clones of himself that he can use techniques using those ice clones, and when he uses his fan for attacks, the frost and the ice techniques become that much harder to deal with. Now finally, at number 1, we have Upper Moon number 1 Kokushibo, the twin brother of the strongest demon slayer in history, Yoriichi, the man who almost killed Muzan. Kokushibo is one of the few Upper Moons who was a former demon slayer, and he uses moon breathing, one of the most broken breathing styles in the series, second only to sun breathing. During his lifetime, he was in possession of the demon slayer mark and the transparent world, so even before becoming a demon, he was pretty overpowered. In terms of power itself, he is the 3rd strongest demon in the series, behind only Demon King Tanjiro and Muzan himself. He's been around for over 500 years, having battled hundreds of demon slayers, if not thousands of them. And on top of having mastery of total concentration and being a Mark Hashira, again, he's one of the few who can access the transparent world, and he contains the highest amount of Muzan's blood of any Upper Moon. Amongst the Upper Moons, he is the unquestioned strongest of the group and the true alpha. You don't need to see much from him to know that there's a gap. His interaction with Akaza, it proves it. And when you get to the Infinity Castle, Kokushibo was strong enough that he held off several Hashira level fighters on his own, easily taking down Muichiro despite him being a Mark Hashira, and was throwing down with Gyome and Saname and Genya in that same fight. My man was a monster. At one point during this fight, he's fighting off 2 demon slayers in the form of Gyome and Saname, the 2 strongest of the 9 pillars, despite them having demon slayer marks. In order to bring him down, it required Muichiro and Genya both to give up their lives. Due to the fact that his sword is made up of his flesh, he can regenerate parts of his blade and change its appearance as he sees fit, and he can even transform in battle to gain more of a stat boost, enough so that he called it pointless to try and battle against him using what he calls meaningless attacks. As you would expect, the numerous eyes that he has allows him to look in different directions in a fight. His moon breathing style is so ridiculously cracked that during the time he was alive, there was no possible way for anyone in a future generation to pick up on it, so it died off with him, making it akin to sun breathing, where the difficulty level was just that high, and we all saw how long it took for his successor to Yoriichi's sun breathing to be born. His blood demon art, Crescent Moon Blades, is a complement to his moon breathing, which he can use to send out dozens of moon-shaped slices at his target that are made from his blood, and they can change in direction, size, and speed. It makes it extremely difficult to keep up with them, in a battle setting for that reason. Even Saname himself, someone who has experience as a demon slayer, says that Kokushibo's attacks using this fighting method are difficult to deal with. His moon breathing has a whopping 16 different forms, which you can learn about this and other breathing forms that exist in the Demon Slayer world by clicking on this video to the left, or if you want to explore more anime content, click here to the video on the right.